I want to begin just by telling you I read The Story Factor several years ago. And as I said to you in the initial email, I think it's even, if you look to my right here, it's on the lower shelf. It is at arm's reach. And there were a lot of takeaways. I always think the success of a book is when you flip through it and you see lots of passages with that yellow highlight. And certainly that's the case for your book. One of the things that stood out to me the most and has really stuck for me was that notion of story as a pull mechanism that draws people to us like a magnet instead of a more aggressive form of persuasion that you call a push mechanism.
Right.
Can you begin there and talk a little bit more about how you see push versus pull?
Well, I'll tell you a story about working for J. Walter Thompson back in the day when we used to say it's a great place to work if your parents can afford to send you there. And so what I was taught was that we're building a print ad not to fill it with the information we want to deliver. What we do is we figure out what the key response is after they read it and then work backwards from that. So the key response is, I trust this company. So you're focused not on what it is you want to say, you're focused on what you want them to take away from it. And what ends up happening is that when we try to control and shove all that stuff in, we actually shove people out. And in order for them to feel engaged, they literally have to be engaged in a dual process of interpretation. And so when I learned to write for direct mail. And it was all about how you engage someone so that they're imagining and they're adding their 2 cents worth to your message. And then it feels more like their idea. So it's a pull strategy instead of trying to control or dominate.
And so could you give me maybe a contrasting example of what it looks like when it's not done the right way, and then when you have the end in mind, what it looks like then?
Well, I hesitate to use the right way or the wrong way. Right now, I'm using the terms using a competitive narrative or collaborative narrative. And so you're going to write better stories when you come from this place of realizing that you and your listener are doing this together. And so in your imagination, you have to conjure up a story that, for instance, when I talk about my greyhound, Larry, who he was a racer, and when he came home, he never did figure out really that he wasn't he didn't know what toys were. You know, he was a jock, he was an athlete. And so I'd give him a toy, and one time I gave him a bone, and he chased it all around the yard before he made the intellectual leap that if he put his paws on it, he could chew it. Well, after that, he was on a leash and not really used to that. And he would sometimes want to walk on one side of a telephone pole. And I really wanted to walk on the other side of the telephone pole. And, I could say, I'm the adult and you are the dog. Obey me. But the truth is that when I backed up, he would back up, and then we could go another way. And so I encourage managers to think about how, when they're being controlling with a narrative, and a lot of people actually say that's what they want to do, is control the narrative. And we can see the result of that.
Yeah, certainly in crisis communications, that's the advice. Control the narrative.
And the thing is, you need to gather the existing narratives and let those be the fruit from which you design your stories. So it's a inverse relationship between control and participation.
One of the phrases that also stood out to me from your book was you talk about story as almost embedding mental software into the brains of the receivers. And I just made it sound a lot more insidious than you meant it. Can you talk about what you mean by mental software?
Well, we've talked a little bit about Stephen Covey and the story about being on the train and these kids are going nuts, and then the father's not taking care of him, and then all of a sudden you find out that he had just lost his wife and they had just lost their mother. And it completely retranslates what it is that you think you see. So to shift a paradigm, there was a quote, and God knows whether Muhammad Ali actually said it or not, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's something about how we think about, a deer crossing the road. And when another way to look at it is a road crossing the forest.
That's right.
And so this flexibility, I call it perceptual agility. Because if you have, and we've heard from Chinwanda Adichie, I'm going to have to practice
Say that 10 times fast. Yes,
yeah.
Who is that?
She's the one that did this, the danger of a single story. And so people who think that their goal is to control everybody to use the same interpretation are the people who make up a story or craft a story or create a story and then try to shove it down somebody's throats. What we do is we get the participation. Many times, the best stories I have to make my point are when I was researching the point and trying to get people to tell me their stories about it. And when you get stories from your audience, you're going to get a lot more feeling of validation that you can give them. Even if sometimes you have to tell what I call the I know what you're thinking story, which is, I know you think I'm a liberal but, I also am an entrepreneur. And so, when I'm facilitating, managers, I'll go in and say, okay, now we all need to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Okay. And they look at me and I say, no, I'm kidding. I don't do that crap. But that's a story where they thought they knew who I was. And I had a pretty good sneaking suspicion of what they were thinking. And then I use a story to have them reinterpret that I may be female, I may be a storyteller, but I'm not one of those,
Thanks for watching this video clip of the Speak Good podcast. If you'd like to hear the complete episode, please check out your favorite podcast directory and subscribe now. Thanks for watching.